I am Usniel of the Hardlard family. Though abrupt, I am delighted to meet you. Usniel greeted the Grand Mage with utmost courtesy, expressing her respect through both words and gestures. After speaking, she even put on an innocent face and gave the mage a pleading look. However, it was all just a show for him. Deep down, she was silently evaluating him, suspecting that he was indeed the Grand Mage, the pinnacle of magic. And wouldn't he know how to traverse different dimensions? Then, she began to fear inwardly, wondering, what if he also realizes that he's not from here and has been reincarnated? She anxiously gazed at the Grand Mage, fearing that her true identity might be discovered. But contrary to Usniel's worries, the mage involuntarily smiled, praising her as just as the princess had described, truly a courteous young lady. Seeing the mage compliment Usniel, Tesolin was even happier, feeling immensely flattered himself. He cheered, indeed. Then, with great pride, he boasted to the Grand Mage that Usniel was not only intelligent but also the most beautiful and friendly person in the world. The more he spoke, the more excited he became, proudly believing that she would marry him. However, after Tesolin uttered this sentence, Usniel felt a chill run through the air. It seemed as though she was being suppressed by Tesolin's mindless words, leaving her in anguish. Looking at the two servants behind her, she silently lamented, speaking such words in front of the queen's servants. She then softly reminded Tesolin, "I've told you not to say such things," scolding him gently. But Tesolin continued his innocent and endless performance, feeling slighted. He sulkily asked, "Why not? Who's listening?" His innocent look made Usniel feel somewhat sorry for him. However, a second later, he immediately turned as cold as ice, casting a sinister glance behind him and asking, "Aren't they?" Tesolin's eyes and words carried such power that both servants suddenly felt a chill. The atmosphere around them seemed to freeze instantly. Both servants instinctively bowed and requested, "May we be excused, sir?" This strange behavior made Usniel somewhat suspicious. However, Tesolin quickly regained her attention by playfully suggesting, "Let's read books together." Meanwhile, the Grand Mage promptly resumed his teaching, saying cheerfully, "Now, let's begin our lesson." Just as they started a new topic, the Grand Mage began to discuss passionately, "Normally, when we talk about magic, people think of spells or incantations, right? But all the origins of magic stem from dark magic." While the mage lectured, Usniel listened attentively, while Tesolin, beside her, seemed lost in admiration, gazing at Usniel. The Grand Mage continued explaining that dark magic is the basic energy source for sustaining life, emphasizing the importance of understanding this before starting formal lessons. Despite his complex vocabulary, Usniel grasped every word and remained deeply focused, even flipping through her books as if searching for something. After searching for a while, she boldly asked, "Excuse me, Grand Mage, may I ask a question?" The Grand Mage was surprised and kindly asked, "What is it, young lady?" Usniel received permission from the mage, and without hesitation, she quickly asked, "Do you know the story of the angel and the mountain peasant of Gunna?" Before the Grand Mage could respond, Tesolin sitting beside her eagerly interjected, "Oh, I've read that in the royal library. It's about the angel and the peasant who stole the angel's shirt beneath the Gunna mountain, and although the angel fell in love with him, she still wanted to return to the sky." Usniel had a hunch that fairy tales are often based on real events. So, she speculated and asked the Grand Mage if the sky where angels lived and the earth where peasants lived were indeed two different worlds. By now, she had a glimmer of hope. If angels could move through dimensions like she did when reincarnated in this world, what about them? The more she thought, the more eager she became to know if such dimensions existed or if there was a way to move between worlds. She appeared extremely curious, her eyes full of anticipation as she looked expectantly at the Grand Mage. Upon hearing her question, even the Grand Mage had to praise, "That's indeed an interesting question." But just as Usniel awaited eagerly, hoping for an answer, the Grand Mage regretfully continued, "Unfortunately, we cannot know how to open that door." Upon hearing this, Usniel's hope shattered. Clenching her fists tightly, her voice filled with disbelief, she asked, "But why?" The Grand Mage calmly replied, because passing through to another world is possible only for those who are angels, not humans. Humans, no matter how hard they try, cannot know that path. As soon as the Grand Mage finished speaking, Yuzniel felt defeated. She no longer felt as enthusiastic as before, sitting down crestfallen, murmuring to herself, I thought this time I had truly found a way back. While Yuzniel sank into despondency, Tesolin beside her grew increasingly anxious, observing her expression and realizing she wasn't happy. This made him quite uneasy. Meanwhile, the mage remained composed, explaining that Gunna Mountain had been a mystery since ancient times. Therefore, who knows, there might be a way to connect with another world there. In the face of the two children's contemplative expressions, he gently added that if the existence were not human but something like ancient dragons or deities, they might know the way. At this point, both the male and female leads pondered for a while until Tesolin suddenly blurted out a question, surprising Yuzniel. However, she remained silent, watching Tesolin beside her as he continued to ask the mage, what about demons? Yuzniel was taken aback by this. Yet, she remained silent as Tesolin once again pressed the mage, do demons know? But this time, the Grand Mage was no longer gentle. He seemed irritated, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He scolded Tesolin, Your Majesty, why mention demons? Such dark words should not be uttered. Demons are malevolent entities that ensnare humans with their words. Tesolin fell silent, ignoring the mage's admonition. He moved closer, gently patting Yuzniel's back as if to comfort her, though he didn't know what she was looking for. Then, as night fell in Yuzniel's mansion, on the spacious and soft bed, she focused on her reading while a lazy golden head lay sprawled beside her. Not only did Tesolin lounge on the bed, but he also exclaimed with delight, sleeping in Yuzniel's room is so delightful. Hearing this, Yuzniel bluntly criticized him, You insisted on accompanying me home when I was about to leave, remember? With a hint of irritation, she threw her book at Tesolin and warned, Even if the queen scolds you, I won't know. Surprisingly, Tesolin had the audacity to blame her, saying, That's why I said if Yuzniel stays in the palace. Mentioning the palace made Yuzniel feel a headache coming on. Unable to contain a sigh, she told Tesolin that just the thought of it made her suffocate and unable to sleep. Hearing her tired voice, Tesolin began to feel sorry, rubbing his nose where Yuzniel had hit him and sincerely responding to her, That's because Yuzniel is too kind. Tesolin even shamelessly said to her, The palace is all black, only you are the light. Then, to Yuzniel's bewildered surprise, he casually continued, That's why I said you should marry me quickly. After saying this, he immediately rushed forward while Yuzniel was unguarded, planting a strong kiss on her cheek, even though he felt a bit embarrassed himself. After the kiss, fearing Yuzniel's retaliation, he quickly hid under the blanket. However, he couldn't hide his joy, laughing happily from under the covers, Good night, Yuzniel. As for Yuzniel, she could only mutter in frustration, unable to articulate her feelings, but seeing the boy vanish under the blanket. She could only remain silent and helpless, silently thinking, sometimes that wet MIT kid acts so recklessly, which really bothers me. Little did she know, as soon as she had this thought, a chubby hand emerged from under the blanket, firmly grasping her hand and reassuring her, Don't worry too much, as Tesolin also popped his head out of the blanket, sincerely expressing to Yuzniel, Whatever you want, I'll do it for you. Hearing these words from the boy, Yuzniel, though no longer angry, felt embarrassed. So, she complained, You also don't know what I want. But she only muttered under her breath, her actions still gentle. She lay down beside Tesolin, closed her eyes, and sincerely said to him, Still, thank you for comforting me, Tesolin. And there was another sentence she kept to herself, not saying it out loud, I also really appreciate your affection. That night, Yuzniel once again dreamt of her past life, the doctor's urgent voice constantly ringing in her ears, urgently announcing, She's been stabbed by a robber and is bleeding heavily. Prepare for a blood transfusion. In this place, standing in the cold, chaotic emergency room, Yuzniel realized she was in that dream again. Why was her mother here? Yuzniel's pitiful mother stood beside the bloody body of her only daughter, desperately pleading, No. My daughter, don't leave me. Hearing those words, Yuzniel felt immense pain. She knew she was at fault for her mother's suffering, but all she could silently say was, "Sorry, Mom, for leaving you behind." But in the dream, Yuzniel felt her body strange, every joint ached terribly, as if being torn apart. It hurt so much. Yuzniel panicked and collapsed, tears streaming down her face. She cried out in desperation, calling, "Mom! Help me!" Just as she was in the midst of agonizing pain and despair, a voice from afar echoed with concern, continuously calling her name, "Yuzniel! Wake up, Yuzniel!" The call jolted her awake from the nightmare. Opening her eyes, she saw the worried face of the male lead. Yuzniel hesitated, calling out Tesolin's name, and immediately, the male lead responded, "Yeah, I'm here." Yuzniel noticed their awkward position. She reminded Tesolin, who was lying on top of her, "Can you get off?" Tesolin seemed slightly startled at this, quickly shifting and rolling off Yuzniel. She reached out to adjust her hair, sighing, "You're always like this, Tesolin." Tesolin hurriedly tried to justify himself, "Oh, I thought you were having a nightmare, so I wanted to wake you up." Just waking up, Yuzniel didn't want to argue with the boy, so she just nodded absent-mindedly, "Okay, let's just say that's it." Tesolin blushed, wanting to explain, "Just say that? What do you mean?" His cheeks puffed adorably as he said to Yuzniel, "Everything I said was true, my reaction was just because I heard you say you were in pain." Yuzniel remained silent, not responding. She still vividly remembered the pain, like dying and coming back to life. Her eyes reflected intense pain, and the ache in her left chest flared up again, where Yuzniel had been stabbed with a knife, the sensation still vividly felt. Yuzniel recalled and silently thought that after being reincarnated in this world, she constantly dreamed of the past, scenes of herself being stabbed by a stranger in her previous life, the memories of nearing death in the hospital repeating over and over. Thinking of this, Yuzniel involuntarily clutched the blanket, trying to appear calm, to conceal her fear. Yuzniel immersed herself in her thoughts, always feeling like an alien in this world. The dream seemed to push her back to the old world, like a curse. Hearing Yuzniel's murmurs, Tesolin looked puzzled and asked her, "Huh? What did you say?" It was then that Yuzniel suddenly woke up from her thoughts, realizing she had been somewhat lost. She quickly explained, "It's nothing," not knowing what to think. Tesolin's cheeks turned red as he tried to flatter her, "Of course, I want to kiss you, but..." But his next words weren't worth listening to. Yuzniel quickly pulled the blanket off and got out of bed, cutting off Tesolin's words, smiling lightly and calling out, "Tesolin, let's go have breakfast." A moment later, Yuzniel and Tesolin quickly arrived in the dining room of the Duke's residence, where a lavish breakfast spread was already laid out before them. Before they could even sit down or touch their chopsticks, Yuzniel was interrupted by an excited call for attention. Before Yuzniel could react, she was suddenly doted on by the most beautiful elf mother, Seal, who lovingly said, "Good morning, sweetheart." Yuzniel was slightly taken aback, then sighed as usual and complained to her mother, "You're quite strong today, Mom." Mother Seal happily replied, "I'm an elf, after all." Seal hugged her adorable daughter tightly before kissing her cheek affectionately, asking, "Did my little one sleep well? You're still so young, so it's good to sleep with me." While Yuzniel was feeling extremely embarrassed by this attention, at the same time, a strong hand was placed on her mother's shoulder, calling her name Yuzniel's father. Seeing the familiar figure, Yuzniel exclaimed excitedly, "Dad." Duke Milan smiled gently as he reminded his wife, "Well, we also have a prince here." With that, Yuzniel was finally released from her mother's embrace. Her mother went to greet Tesolin, saying, "Oh, right, there's also a little prince here. Oh no, not a prince, but a future husband." Tesolin obediently greeted his future mother-in-law, "Good morning, Duchess." With that, the Duke and Duchess sat down at the table with the two children, and the atmosphere during the meal was very harmonious, with everyone dining in a very noble and quiet manner. However, suddenly Yuzniel noticed Tesolin sitting nervously, his hands and feet trembling as he tried to cut his food into small pieces in front of him. Tesolin was feeling extremely embarrassed, silently thinking, "Why are my hands so weak today?" He muttered quietly, ouch, my fingers hurt. Although Tesolin's voice was very low, Yuzniel sitting next to him could hear everything. It turned out that Tesolin's finger was injured. Realizing this, Yuzniel offered him her pre-cut food, saying to the male lead, Tesolin, eat this, and also, give me your hand here. She gently took Tesolin's hand with a hint of concern and asked, are you hurt again? Tesolin was deeply moved by this caring concern. He stared at Yuzniel, unable to blink for a second. Seeing this scene, Seal couldn't help but tease her daughter, it seems like Yuzniel is melting in front of the prince, huh? Hearing this, Yuzniel blushed and let go of Tesolin's hand, denying, that's not true, it's just sometimes. She silently thought, I only acted that way because I saw Tesolin in pain. Hearing her daughter's words, Seal fell silent for a moment, a bit puzzled. She said, you seem sensitive, my dear, I need to care more about you. Seal didn't know her daughter was lost in her memories at that moment. Yuzniel remained silent, thinking about her family in this life. They always lived in harmony and were very healthy, completely different from her past life, where Yuzniel's family was not happy at all. Her father abandoned the family and started a new one, while Yuzniel's frail mother had to bear all the burdens alone. Her health deteriorated due to her father's infidelity. However, she never complained to Yuzniel, instead, she always supported and encouraged her, saying, my daughter, I will do the work of both your father and me. Despite all the hardships, she always showed love for Yuzniel. Yuzniel realized that every time she saw Tesolin in pain, she subconsciously thought of her mother and wanted to take care of him. Yuzniel also felt that their personalities were somewhat similar, straightforward and resilient. Even if they were in pain or tired, they always smiled immediately. Yuzniel felt a pang in her heart. Although everyone was happy and the family was complete in the present, Yuzniel's mother was different from them, she was alone, and Yuzniel felt the need to return to the original world to be by her mother's side. Yuzniel suddenly remembered what the great sage had said about a way to connect to another world. If ancient dragons or deities truly existed, perhaps there was a way to reach another world. Yuzniel asked her fairy mother, I heard that fairies are closer to the fairy world than humans, so is there a way to reach another world? Hearing her daughter's strange question, Seal was somewhat surprised. Yuzniel had secretly resolved to return to the original world. Yuzniel turned to ask her mother if there was a way to reach another world. Lady Seal heard the question and pondered for a moment, then asked her daughter back, another world? Why are you curious about this? Yuzniel remained silent, somewhat hesitant. Although telling the truth might lead to her family's help and her own comfort, she couldn't bear to hurt them or reject this world where her parents sincerely loved her. So Yuzniel chose to lie to her mother, because I heard the great sage say so, but there are some parts one don't understand. Since you're the only fairy in the capital, I thought you might know. Lady Seal couldn't help but burst into laughter, joking with her husband, oh my, did you hear that? Our daughter actually acknowledges us. Yuzniel felt a pang of guilt for deceiving her mother, but faced with her daughter's hopeful eyes, she had no other choice. Lady Seal shook her head, regretfully unable to tell her daughter about another world. Yuzniel was very curious and asked, why not? Didn't you come from the fairy world? But Seal insisted it was a secret. Yuzniel suspected the secret and sighed, deciding to explain her feelings to her daughter about how fairies were not allowed to reveal anything similar, as it was a kind of covenant. Yuzniel realized it was no wonder she had searched for so long without finding any clues. After the meal, Yuzniel ran frantically to the library to find books, with Tesolin hurrying after her, worriedly calling for Yuzniel to calm down. Yuzniel didn't hear and continued searching for the fallen books. Yuzniel felt disappointed when she couldn't find the book, but finally found it and together with Tesolin, they explored the secrets of that mysterious book. Legend has it that the first covenant between the light deity Ludo and the dark deity Demon was created. Ludo created continents and nurtured humans, protecting them from the temptations of demons. However, over time, the deities disappeared, and the continent was divided between those who believed in the deities and those who didn't. This discord led to endless war. Yuzniel felt extremely disappointed about this and expressed her curiosity, Is this all related to the deities? Then, the story of the northern region's continued triumph over the southern empire since the first emperor appeared. Usniel silently thought that unlike the southern empire, the northern empire did not have a national religion. Although she had recently studied theology, most of the northern empire still believed in the deity Ludo. Usniel hoped to find more information from the books, but after reading, she felt even more disappointed because the information was too scarce. She lay down on the floor feeling discouraged and realized that things weren't going as she had predicted. Throughout that day, Tesolin was always by Usniel's side. At this moment, he gently lay down beside Usniel and whispered softly, "You seem different today, Usniel." Hearing Tesolin say that, Usniel didn't respond and asked about something else. When she saw Usniel trying to change the subject, Tesolin spoke up, "I'll stay here a bit longer before leaving." Usniel looked at Tesolin's youthful face and asked softly, "Why are you so fond of me?" Tesolin seized the opportunity and expressed his interest, nodding vigorously and saying, "Yes, I like you very much." To Usniel's surprise, Tesolin continued confidently, "So come live with me. My parents say I can marry someone very good." Hearing this, Usniel sat up uncomfortably and reminded him, "Tesolin, that's enough, don't do that in front of others." Tesolin curiously asked why, but Usniel just thought about the reason and warned Tesolin not to do such things in front of others in the palace. Usniel muttered to herself, "This fool, so clueless, just like a child." However, she didn't want to hurt Tesolin's sensitive heart, so she gave him a reason, saying, "Tesolin, in marriage, it can only happen when you're older, do you understand?" Tesolin nodded, and Usniel wanted to reiterate her ideal model so Tesolin could quickly abandon his intentions. She said in a low voice, "And about my ideal model." But before she could finish, she saw sadness on Tesolin's face. He interrupted her, "I know, your ideal model is not to cry easily and know magic, but not be arrogant. In appearance, it's black hair like the night sky and black eyes, right?" Usniel looked at Tesolin with a cold gaze and replied, "You know it well, Your Highness." She did so because she didn't want to waste his time, and she didn't want to get caught up in the palace power struggles and Tesolin's disappointment. Usniel stood up to leave, but unexpectedly, Tesolin sat on the floor and hesitantly pulled Usniel's dress, asking, "But my hair is blonde, and my eyes are gray, can you change your ideal model?" Usniel turned to look at Tesolin, tears in her eyes, and he seemed a little unwilling in front of her. However, because of the importance of the matter, she could only sigh and splash cold water on his face. Usniel coldly pushed Tesolin's hand away and said in a low voice, "You were wrong the moment you started crying, and I can't change my ideal model." Hearing this, Tesolin almost cried. He quickly ran up and held Usniel's hand tightly, earnestly asking if she could like him. He said that as long as she agreed, he would give her everything she wanted. However, Usniel didn't change her mind and reminded him, "I've already said, it's not just about trying, and not everything can change just by forcing it." Tesolin felt what he said was wrong, afraid that Usniel would be angry with him, so he hesitantly apologized. Usniel didn't blame him and just said that he should leave later. But this time, Tesolin didn't respond. He stood still and tightly held his hands, murmuring something. Usniel saw him standing still, not understanding what was going on, and turned back to ask, "Tesolin, what did you say?" A voice echoed in Tesolin's head, "I don't want to go back, I don't want to leave you." He didn't get a response. Usniel suspected something again and approached him again. Her calling voice woke Tesolin up. He immediately returned to his usual demeanor and demanded Usniel to hold his hand before leaving. Usniel had to say, "Oh dear, come here." So she gently took Tesolin's hand and walked out of the library. Tesolin looked at their tightly clasped hands and thought to himself that Usniel was always sincere and affectionate towards him, but that alone wasn't enough. He still desired her care and love. Tesolin kept staring at their tightly clasped hands, silently wondering how to get that. Set aside this matter for now. The scene transitions to a sword fight between two dukes, Warren and Usniel. As usual, little Tesolin is present today, trailing behind Usniel. Watching the girl train with her guards, Tesolin sits nearby, enthusiastically cheering and praising his favorite person. "You're so cool." This man is Duke Warren, the former captain of the Royal Cavalry and the current Prince's Guard. Now, he looks at Usniel before him with fondness and remarks to her, "Indeed. Let's take a break, Lady Usniel. Your posture is excellent. Have you learned swordsmanship before?" Seeing Usniel take a break, Tesolin immediately brings a towel to wipe her sweat. Before Usniel could respond to the Duke's question, a voice from behind calls out, catching her attention. "Usniel." It turns out to be Ather, a childhood friend of Usniel's. He happily says to her, "Since you didn't come to sword class, I came here to find you." "Is Duke Warren here too?" Usniel is somewhat surprised to hear this. "I'm sorry, I forgot to inform you that I couldn't make it," she says, expressing regret for this uninvited guest. Tesolin silently grips a corner of her dress from behind, seemingly displeased. Ather, oblivious, continues to tease her, "No wonder you always win when we spar. Turns out you've been learning from the Duke." Usniel calmly replies, "You're just weaker than me." Ather is taken aback by her response, "What?" At this moment, the protagonist's displeasure is evident, his face watching Ather chatting cheerfully with Usniel. Finally, Ather recognizes the prince and greets him warmly. "It's a pleasure to meet the crown prince." Unexpectedly, Tesolin shouts loudly, "Get out, who allowed you to come here?" Tesolin erupts, unable to restrain himself, rushing to grab Ather's collar aggressively, forcing him to leave. "Today, Usniel promised to stay with me." Tesolin doesn't stop, giving Ather a slap in the astonishment of everyone. Guards hurry to restrain Tesolin. "Your Highness, if you keep this up, you'll collapse." But Tesolin persists, shouting at Ather, "Lord Warren, get rid of this guy for me." Usniel asks the guards to hold Tesolin back and then runs to ask Ather, "Are you okay?" Ather replies, "I'm fine." That day, Usniel feels she tried to explain to Tesolin clearly, but he stubbornly refused to understand. On the other hand, Usniel is caring for Ather, and Tesolin's tears fall. "I hurt too, Usniel," Tesolin cries out. "I hurt more than he does, why don't you pay attention to me?" Caught between the two children, Usniel's face becomes more awkward. But conversely, Tesolin's possessiveness becomes more severe. "It's as if he wants to drive everyone away from me," Usniel recalls. "At parties, when people were interacting and having fun with me, Tesolin would prevent me from playing with them and talking to others. Because of that possessiveness, everyone in the Usniel family was drawn into gossip and rumors. I heard that the noble family was using their daughter to ascend to the position of crown princess. Is that true? The emperor greatly values the Hardlard Duke family. They raised many questions to criticize Usniel's family. Isn't the crown prince brainwashed?" Despite those remarks, Tesolin always seemed uninterested, only clinging to Usniel. Despite this, Usniel thought Tesolin's obsession wasn't serious, it was just normal possessiveness towards a first friend. At that time, she only thought Tesolin was childish, so she always tried to comfort him whenever he acted out. "Don't worry, Tesolin," she held Tesolin's hand with a loving gaze, promising him, "No matter who I meet, you will always be my friend." Usniel believed that she always made Tesolin feel at ease. Tesolin was also very happy to hold her hand. "Thank you, Usniel, very much. I really like you." Time passed and finally, the prince's coming-of-age period arrived. Seal occasionally wondered, "Why haven't we seen the prince lately?" The Duke standing behind her replied, "I heard the prince can't go out because of the pain of coming of age." Hearing this, Seal felt a bit sorry. "Oh, really? Is it that painful?" Because of the pain during this period, Tesolin no longer has the strength to run to see Usniel anymore. He even refused her offer to visit. Seeing her daughter somewhat unhappy after a long time without seeing the prince, Seal asked her with concern, "Are you upset about not seeing the prince?" Usniel didn't know if her mother hit the nail on the head, but she hesitated and replied, "How could I? I only feel sorry for not being able to attend the royal magic class." Hearing her daughter say that, Seal felt a bit relieved. Is that so? She suggested, if that's the case, then spend more appropriate time practicing magic with Ather. What do you think? Yuzniel hesitated. With Ather? Seal nodded and continued, just like this, then get engaged. It's also good. The Duke was astonished to hear this, and spat out a mouthful of water. What did you just say, dear wife? Seal smiled and explained, if Yuzniel gets engaged, she can naturally stay away from the prince. The Duke worriedly asked, are you doing this, because of the recent rumors people have been talking about? Seal sighed and denied that she didn't care about those things, but with the intuition of a spirit, she felt that her daughter should not be beside the prince. Hearing these words, Yuzniel fell silent, lost in her own thoughts. Lately, Mom's been cautious with Tesolin. Engagement? I've never thought about it before, but it's not a bad option. If there's a fiancé, then Tesolin will restrain his controlling behavior, something that causes headaches will disappear. It's a reasonable choice, but... Yuzniel interrupted her thoughts as she picked up a book and spoke to her mother about her opinion. No, I don't intend to be attached to anyone. Yuzniel decided this because she believed that eventually she would return to her own world. So, to prevent anyone else from getting hurt, I don't want to have deep relationships with anyone. Thinking this, Yuzniel smiled and reassured her mother, you don't need to worry about my relationship with Tesolin. I just see him as my brother. But these words Yuzniel said to her mother were meaningless because after many days without meeting, Tesolin had grown up and finally came to visit Yuzniel. Long time no see, he looked at the boy standing in front of him. Yuzniel felt a bit strange, how could he grow up so fast in just a short time? Yuzniel raised her head to call his name, but remembered the etiquette and bowed ceremoniously. Nice to meet you, Your Highness. Tesolin quickly stopped Yuzniel. Don't bow, I didn't bring any guards, so it's just us here. So don't use honorifics and don't bow. Tesolin gently held Yuzniel's hand, stood up, his voice full of affection. Treat me like anyone else, don't do things like that anymore. My heart is about to break. Tesolin unexpectedly kissed Yuzniel's hand. Yuzniel was surprised, but she didn't push Tesolin away. Tesolin smiled happily at her, his eyes full of longing and affection for her. Tesolin's action left Yuzniel stunned and blushing. Tesolin noticed this and teasingly touched Yuzniel's face. Look, you're blushing. This made Yuzniel stunned, and she hesitantly replied, you're being too noisy. Yuzniel felt embarrassed and turned her face away to hide her emotions. She said, whenever I come to the palace, I always feel nervous, so I have to maintain etiquette in front of others, which makes me tired. Hearing this, the protagonist spoke up to comfort her, don't worry when you're with me, you don't need to bow. If you want, I can let you in and out freely anywhere in this empire, because I will change everything in this empire. Tesolin boldly declared to Yuzniel. Hearing this, Yuzniel immediately asked in curiosity, how can you change the laws of the empire? But this time, Tesolin didn't answer the question directly but stood behind the curtain mysteriously and replied, that's a secret, so you just have to wait a little longer. Yuzniel looked at Tesolin somewhat unfamiliarly. At that moment, although Yuzniel couldn't remember the protagonist's face clearly, she felt the intuition of a fairy for the first time. Yuzniel realized that something was not quite right, and the stranger's peculiarity continued after the day Tesolin didn't come to visit Yuzniel anymore, but stayed in the palace. The appearance of demons at the border caused chaos throughout the empire. The unlucky incident that day was quickly forgotten, and time passed. Tesolin's 6th birthday was approaching. The time for Yuzniel's family to be expelled from the capital was also approaching. Only 35 days remained until this birthday event, which gathered numerous nobles. Everyone marveled at the scene inside. Wow, the crowd is huge. This is also the first event organized since the prince's illness improved. They had sent invitations in advance, so everyone could come here to impress the royal family at this event. And another highlight of the party was the presence of the Hardlard Duke's family. People looked at them and whispered, look, the Hardlard Duke's family is here too. I heard that the dress the young lady is wearing was bestowed by the Emperor, isn't it? It's said that because of Miss Han, the prince's illness has improved. They didn't bother to lower their voices, and Yuzniel heard all of these comments. She felt terribly annoyed and just wanted the party to end quickly so she could go home. At this moment, a cute little blonde girl appeared, attracting everyone's attention. Oh. Is that Miss Eugene Suni here too? The girl was the one the Empress intended to become the prince's consort. Also at this moment, a solemn voice echoed, and all the order in the imperial court followed the Emperor and Empress leading the prince as they entered. The atmosphere immediately became quiet, and everyone bowed respectfully. It's an honor to meet you, Your Majesty. The Emperor nodded, giving permission, and then raised his head to proceed. The party went smoothly amidst the loving scene of the Emperor and Empress. The Emperor praised the great feast. Empress, you've worked hard. The Empress smiled shyly. Seeing the couple like that, Yuzniel silently admired how the Emperor still loved his wife as before. Long time no see, she quickly searched for Tesolin's figure. This was the first time she had seen Tesolin since the day at the library. He looked much weaker now, and his complexion didn't seem good. Is he in pain again? At that moment, Tesolin also quickly looked over here to find Yuzniel's figure. Ah, their eyes met. Tesolin immediately felt happy and wanted to run back to Yuzniel, who was standing there. But before he could move, the Empress reached out and pulled him back. She draped her arm over the protagonist's shoulder and reminded Tesolin to maintain his composure because everyone was watching. Saying that, she took Tesolin upstairs to meet everyone. But Tesolin didn't want to hear these words and replied, "It's okay, I just want to be with Yuzniel." Obviously, this disobedience of the Empress's order by Tesolin quickly aroused the interest of everyone around, and they started criticizing the Duke's family. Who are they, the Hardlard princess? So, he's so biased like that? Yuzniel stood by and heard everyone's words without thinking about her own family. The unintentional words of the nobility also followed the same path as the previous courtiers. I didn't expect the Hardlard family to be like this. What a disappointment. How did they coax the prince so sweetly? Yuzniel clenched her fists tightly, knowing that, since all the nobles are gathered here, if it gets more chaotic, my family will be at a disadvantage. Seeing her daughter's expression, the Duke and his wife quickly comforted her not to worry. However, Yuzniel silently determined, I don't want to cause any more harm to my family. So, she decided to bow respectfully according to the protocol for the royal family. Apologies for the late greeting, Your Highness. Yuzniel bowed 90 degrees towards Tesolin's direction. Tesolin heard this and was somewhat stunned, his eyes flashed looking at the girl in front of him. Yuzniel, he softly called. Yuzniel pretended not to hear and continued to bow ceremoniously, saying, Happy birthday. Tesolin sadly said, Don't greet me like that. However, Yuzniel still bowed, without a reply. Even though Tesolin had said not to do this time she wanted to make clear boundaries with him. Tesolin stood on the balcony, hesitatingly watching Yuzniel behave distantly towards him. Feeling sad, he thought, what should I do? And so, the scene of the party became increasingly lively. Yuzniel stood in a quiet corner, only then could she breathe a sigh of relief, murmuring to herself, noble ceremonies are indeed troublesome. She observed the party, and when she looked towards Tesolin's figure, she silently thought, now Tesolin is officially involved in politics, so it's natural for me to keep my distance like this. In her heart, Yuzniel felt a bit of self-blame because she didn't expect his expression to look so abandoned. At that moment, he also saw Yuzniel standing in the corner, and someone stepped forward calling out, Yuzniel. Ather saw Yuzniel turn around and immediately smiled brightly. Approaching him, Ather initiated a conversation. Why are you always sitting alone in a corner? Don't you know everyone wants to talk to you? Hearing this, Yuzniel simply smiled and replied, It's because I prefer it this way, that's why I stand alone here. If you want to talk, go ahead and talk to them. Ather adjusted his tie seriously and said, Because of my duty, I cannot neglect my friends. Intrigued by this, Yuzniel asked, Duty? So, a knight of courtesy would visit the royal knights and attend all the swordsmanship classes, right? Hearing Yuzniel's question, Ather hesitated for a moment and then replied, yes, that's right. My dream is to become a knight, so how could I refuse the opportunity to visit the royal knights? It's an opportunity not to be missed. Upon hearing this, Yuzniel thought to himself, but the royal knights, the elite guard of the monarchy, are famous and very exclusive, and the requirements for joining are very high. He then asked Ather, how does one get invited for such a visit? Before answering Yuzniel's question, Ather, with no intention of hiding, said, it's because the prince asked me. Surprised to hear this, Yuzniel asked again, Prince Tesolin? Did you make a mistake? Ather immediately affirmed, no, it was indeed him who directly asked. Ather proudly boasted, surely, they know about my abilities and have taken notice of me. Hearing Ather's self-assured words, Yuzniel suddenly felt a dislike towards him. He continued, but anyway, the prince is frequently ill, which is a serious matter. I've heard that even with medicines produced by various races, the illness doesn't improve much. Yuzniel couldn't see, but Ather winked. Ather let out a painful groan, attracting the attention of those nearby. Tesolin, who was nearby, also paid attention to the two of them. Startled, Yuzniel grabbed Ather's sleeve anxiously and asked, is it that painful? Isn't it said that the pain is simply due to growing up? Ather, feeling embarrassed, shook his head, I don't know anymore, I don't know the details of everything. Tess observed them talking to each other in a gloomy manner. Although he couldn't hear what they were saying clearly, he felt extremely uncomfortable. That scene from the past about the party suddenly came to life in Yuzniel's mind. Thunder and lightning struck the party venue, glass doors shattered, and the cries of the nobles echoed throughout the hall. In the midst of everyone's panic, Tesolin suddenly fell, causing even more fear. People began to panic, calling out, Prince! The emperor rushed over, holding his son, and urgently issued orders. Yuzniel witnessed the moment when the prince fell, worriedly calling out Tessa's name as he approached. At that moment, all the nobles panicked and began to flee, not knowing who had shouted, perhaps due to a demon attack. So everyone ran away. Yuzniel's family also hurried back home. Duke Hardlard, along with his wife, quickly rushed to hug their daughter Yuzniel. We need to go outside first, he said. However, she remained worried about Tesolin's condition. Seeing his daughter's concern, Count Milan embraced her gently and comforted, it's all right, my daughter. There are people from the palace here. The prince will be fine. We can meet him again anytime. But contrary to her father's words, she had just heard what Ather said and understood that Tesolin's illness was very serious, and many medicines sent to him were useless. And that was the last image of Tesolin that Yuzniel knew. At that moment, Yuzniel was overwhelmed with ominous premonitions. Indeed, after that day, the emperor expelled her family to Varin, and then, after 14 years, when she met Tesolin again, he was no longer the same. Suddenly, a voice calling Yuzniel brought her back from her memories. Ather, now grown up, was sitting in front of her, asking, what have you been thinking about since then? Yuzniel smiled gently and replied, just reminiscing about the past. Reflecting on herself, she wondered how she had become what she was now. Yuzniel Hardlard, now 20 years old, was a beautiful young woman. The conversation of the three in the garden was still going on peacefully. After hearing Yuzniel's answer, Ather was quite curious and asked what she was thinking about the past. Could she let him know? Suddenly, Eugene, sitting next to them, nudged Ather with his elbow, his tone cold as he reminded, hey, he's very curious. This made Ather very angry, and he turned to speak loudly, what are you doing? Eugene lifted his teacup to sip, reminding in a low voice, Ather, never pry into a lady's thoughts. Duke Ather sighed softly, oh dear. She continued sarcastically, it seems like the royal knights didn't teach you to be attentive to ladies, did they? Isn't that right? Ather chuckled mockingly, that's not what I want to hear from you. Eugene, you've intervened in my and Yuzniel's afternoon tea. Hearing Eugene's words, Ather replied proudly, I knew her earlier than you did. Yusniel, sitting across from them, felt a bit dizzy. She smiled at them and interjected, "It seems like you two have become closer in my absence, right?" The atmosphere became awkward. Ather sighed, "Oh, how familiar." Eugene chimed in, "Hey, Ather, cut it out." Ather scratched his head awkwardly and said, "And that's what I want to ask, how did you two become so close? Aren't you both vying for the same crown right now? Moreover, both of you come from noble families, so shouldn't you be opposed to each other?" Upon hearing the questions from Ather, both girls were momentarily stunned, then they understood each other's intentions and chuckled awkwardly. It turned out that when Yusniel's family was sent back to Varen, Eugene had been sending letters to Yusniel since their exile. Yusniel read each letter, and Eugene always encouraged her. Perhaps it was because of this that their friendship had endured until now. Yusniel placed her hand on her chest and thanked Eugene. "Without him, I wouldn't have been able to hear news from the capital regularly while in Varen." Yusniel seemed to be questioning Ather, "You're nothing but a betrayer who cut off communication halfway." Sensing that look, Ather furrowed his brow and objected, "Yusniel, what are you saying? Betrayal? I feel unjustly accused. Do you know how worried I was when communication suddenly stopped? Today, I felt so sad when I found out that you only replied to Eugene's letters. Every time I wanted to know how you were, I had to go to Eugene. It made me feel extremely awkward." Eugene sat there, sneering, "Ather, that's just karma." Yusniel took a sip of her tea, silently wondering, "So that's how it is. It's so strange. Then where did Ather's letters to me go?" But Eugene was still bothered by the earlier incident. He sighed and explained to Ather, "Actually, Duke Ather, Yusniel and I have never been rivals. We have never intended to become the prince's consort." Eugene reached up to his ear to adjust his earring, smiling faintly, and continued, "Moreover, the person I care about is you." Then Eugene rested his hand on the table and stared at Ather with eyes full of affection. This boldness left him speechless. The conversation among the three now became chaotic. Eugene was about to tease further when he remembered something that would make Yusniel uncomfortable. "Well, now I have another younger sister to take your place, so..." Eugene turned to look at Yusniel. "I apologize to you for what happened at the Colosseum. Yusniel, I heard that my sister Lily was disrespectful to you on the first day of class. I'm deeply ashamed, and on her behalf, I sincerely apologize to you." Eugene sighed and continued, "Because she's the youngest and was born late, my parents spoil her. But I never thought she would be so careless." Upon hearing these words of helplessness, Yusniel quickly waved her hand and said to Eugene, "It's okay, it's not your fault, so don't say that." Eugene nodded and continued, "Actually, my brother and I aren't very close to Lily." Yusniel, hearing this, was somewhat surprised. "Your brother? Nud, right?" Yusniel had met Eugene's younger brother before, and the boy had greeted her. She remembered his face, often blushing. Eugene sighed, "Currently, Lily is imprisoned in the dungeons of the palace. I think my father will soon come to plead for her pardon." Yusniel was surprised and asked, "Me? But what ability do I have?" Eugene asserted, "Because the Emperor will listen to you." Yusniel thought that everyone believed so because of the past. She could only smile, as it had been 14 years since they last met, and such things seemed unlikely. Eugene also seemed a bit surprised. "Then why did I hear that you and the Emperor have been close since childhood? People still think it's a special relationship?" Yusniel didn't know how to explain, so she decided to remain silent. Eugene continued, "Anyway, I think this opportunity is for my youngest sister to learn her lesson." Yusniel nodded and said, "Last time, I overlooked it because it was your sister, but if it happens again, I'll punish her severely." Eugene nodded, showing his clear stance, "All right, don't mind me, just scold her to wake her up." They continued chatting for a while, and as the sunset gradually descended, the afternoon tea came to an end. The sunset cast a majestic and magnificent glow over the castle. Yusniel walked Ather and Eugene home. When she was alone again, Yusniel's footsteps became heavy with worry and sadness evident on her face. She pondered many things in her mind as she walked almost subconsciously for a while. Eventually, her footsteps stopped, and she looked up at a large tree. Did I come here unintentionally? In front of me stands a memering tree that my parents planted to commemorate the day I was born, and when I was young, I used to play with Tesolin here. Yuzniel reached out to touch the tree trunk, whispering to herself that after her exile, she thought the tree would die without care, but luckily, it had grown much larger. She stood there, gazing, with countless memories flooding her mind. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, causing the leaves of the memering tree to fall in front of Yuzniel. This sight added to Yuzniel's heavy heart. Yuzniel closed her eyes and softly said, I said we should keep our distance, for now, Tess. Without needing to turn her head, Yuzniel sensed that someone had just arrived. It was the crown prince. However, a large hand wrapped around Yuzniel's waist, and in a deep voice, Tesolin said, I also have no other choice. Tesolin held Yuzniel tightly, burying his face into her shoulder, his voice full of sorrow. Why didn't you come to me, Yuzniel? Yuzniel coldly replied, I told you not to come to my house. But Tesolin, ignoring her words, asked again, Yuzniel, why did you used to come here? I miss you so much. His face clearly showed the longing he had for her. He was extremely sad as he burst into tears. Do you really hate me now? In this intimate moment, Tesolin once again apologized. I was wrong, Yuzniel. If you want, I will spare Lily Suni. So, please don't hate me. Yuzniel gently touched Tesolin's face, wiping away his tears, and looked at him with tenderness. It's not that I hate you, but... Yuzniel lowered her hand and reminded Tesolin, because you are the emperor, you can't live as freely as before. Yuzniel remembered the unpleasant rumors about Tesolin's family at his birthday party in the past, which had hurt his family deeply. She truly hated those strange rumors. Tess reached out to hold Yuzniel's hand, comforting her, Don't worry, from now on, no one will bother you anymore. He smiled sweetly and promised, I promise. Yuzniel's face showed a hint of surprise upon hearing Tesolin's words, thinking that his words and expressions were just like when they were children. Despite the passage of time, Tesolin remained unchanged. Yuzniel chuckled, realizing that perhaps it was herself who had changed, not Tesolin. She asked Tesolin to treat her as he did before, right? Under the gentle sunset, Yuzniel reminded Tesolin once again, but not in front of others. And don't come to my house anymore. It would be very inconvenient if my parents found out. Tesolin obediently nodded in response, Yuzniel, I understand. Tesolin was feeling very happy at the moment, unable to contain his joy. He hugged Yuzniel tightly, saying, Thank you, Yuzniel. This made her slightly annoyed. I can't breathe, Tess. Yuzniel felt helpless in response to the affection the protagonist showed her. She gently rubbed his back and exclaimed, You still cling to me just like before, don't you? While comforting Tesolin, Yuzniel thought to herself, I've returned after 14 years, but I'm fine. I've been accepted into the Colosseum and have the freedom to access the royal library. From now on, I just need to focus on studying magic. Leaning her head on Tesolin's shoulder, Yuzniel continued to think, I've learned that Tesolin is safe and sound, and my family has returned as well. I can also return to my world with my heart. Yuzniel, he softly called, and the more she thought, the more emotionally moved Tesolin became, holding her tighter and saying, You're mine, Yuzniel. Yuzniel believed that their relationship hadn't changed. She didn't know that in a place where she couldn't see, Tesolin's face no longer held the innocence it once did. Later, they went together to a nearby tower to sit and talk. Tesolin and Yuzniel sat closer to each other. He asked if she continued to study swordsmanship and magic in Varan. Yuzniel nodded, yes, during my time studying swordsmanship, I happened to meet good mentors. So, studying at the Colosseum shouldn't pose any difficulties. Hearing her words, Tesolin praised her as usual, Yuzniel, you truly are talented. After a moment, Yuzniel asked, and what about you? His gaze softened even more upon hearing her inquire about him, how have you been during this time? Tesolin remained silent, looking at Yuzniel. After a long pause, he spoke, his eyes full of anticipation as Yuzniel looked at him. Actually, after Yuzniel arrived in Varan, she had long blamed Tesolin. During that time, Yuzniel's family had been robbed of everything, for no reason. She thought that the protagonist was living a comfortable life, without contacting her. But after hearing about Tesolin's situation from his letters, she no longer blamed him. It turned out that since his birthday, the emperor had practically confined the crown prince within the palace and prohibited him from leaving. Except for the ducal family, no one could enter the palace. And during that time, the empress had given birth to a new prince. Yuzniel was astonished to hear this news. Tesolin had a younger brother? Since then, her resentment quickly turned into astonishment, because the emperor had chosen someone other than Tesolin as his successor. Therefore, it was certain that Tesolin had endured difficult days in the palace. Yuzniel couldn't hold back her feelings, because she knew that the emperor and empress wouldn't be pleased with Tessa's changes. Tesolin spoke softly, no matter how difficult it is, I always think of Yuzniel, to keep going. Yuzniel sighed with frustration and asked, if that's the case, why did it take you a whole year after ascending to the throne to bring my family back? Do you know how long I had to wait? Tesolin heard this and couldn't help but smile gently, placing his hand on Yuzniel's. Why did you wait for me? Surprised by Yuzniel's reaction, Tesolin asked again, wait for me? In that sweet moment between them, the protagonist stared deeply into Yuzniel's eyes, leaning closer as if to kiss her. He whispered, I'm very happy. As their lips drew near, Yuzniel suddenly felt embarrassed, blurting out, oh no, and turning away. Blushing, she turned her head, it's not because I'm waiting for you, but for my family to return to how they were before. In her confusion, Yuzniel heard Tesolin speak again, I've been waiting, Yuzniel. Feeling even more sympathy for Tess now, because he never abandoned her for a moment, always remembering her. Tesolin continued to express his feelings for Yuzniel. They remained silent, gazing at each other. Yuzniel wasn't sure how she felt, feeling just as bewildered as Tess. Suddenly, he gently touched Yuzniel's ear, observing it with fascination, unsure if it was because of the sunset or if Yuzniel's ear was turning red. Tess softly whispered, your face is turning red. Yuzniel couldn't bear such intimate actions, hence her blushing. Tesolin, whether innocently or pretending not to know, teasingly asked, are you feeling hot? Yuzniel was annoyed, standing up and saying, it's because of you. She blamed Tesolin, saying, you always do strange things, that's why. Tess sat back, continuing to ask, strange? We've always been like this since we were young, why is it strange now? Feeling like a child again, Yuzniel suddenly realized something, his intimate actions from childhood didn't bother her then, so why did she feel uncomfortable now? There's something really strange, she wondered to herself. Tesolin, still feigning innocence, asked, what's so strange? Yuzniel quietly concluded that perhaps it had been too long, making these actions unfamiliar to her now. Yuzniel was lost in thought, finding Tesolin's words from earlier confusing. What does he mean by saying he'll come to see me? Why does he keep saying such vague things, and then disappearing? It's really annoying. Walking through the castle corridors, she wondered why the living room lights were on at this hour. Who could be here now? She hadn't received any visitors. Opening the door, she walked in, only to find an uninvited guest standing before her.